Great to meet you, everyone. My name is Pavel Tomczuk. I'm the co-founder and CEO of TechTree. And together with me, please welcome Francesco, who's the co-founder of Silicon Roundabout, who's the partner of that event. And the format is simple. We're doing it for the fourth or fifth time. So one of my favorite questions I ask to people I meet and talk about TechTree is how many, we're all in tech industry, how many CTOs you can name. And I've either got an answer that is none or Steve Wozniak, which is not a great thing. So, the idea behind TechTree is that, among other things, we want to create a space where we give engineers who are building these amazing products a spotlight so they can share what they're working on, as well as discuss and meet new friends and learn about interesting companies. And I'm super lucky to team up with Francesco, who's been doing that for a long time at Silicon Roundabout. So, Francesco, over to you.
Thank you, Pavel. So, welcome everyone from my side too. As Pavel is saying, I'm one of the co-founders of the Silicon Roundabout Tech Meetup. I'm sure most of you have either come through the meetup or have come to our meetups anyway. And for those who haven't, we are the largest tech meetup in Europe, and our passion and mission is to connect engineers, technical founders, and as well as normal founders and other startup industry players together. We normally do it, bar COVID, through live meetups that we host in London for now, and soon to expand across the country as soon as we launch our first fund, which will happen in Q1, Q2 next year. So we're getting ready to invest in high-tech companies and, of course, the people who build them. But what's been happening recently as the community grew is that it was hard to strike a balance between engineers like myself. By the way, I'm a coder like most of you out there, myself, programmer, C++, and some Python, and the founder side. So that's kind of where the partnership with TechTree came along, and I'm very pleased to say that this is just one of the few first of a long series, and that we hope to grow and develop constantly next year with Pavel, because we really want to put the spotlight on the technical side, on the engineers who are part of the community, and on the startups on the technical side that are building within the community. So the idea with this series and with this side of the meetup going forward is to create more and more engagement and more great content and connections for those that actually build the tech for startups. So if you are coming from the Silicon Roundabout side, continue to stay tuned in, because there will be way more of these events. And please give either myself or Pavel feedback on how we can improve it. We really want to take this to the next level and be a reference event for coders across the UK to just connect to startups and vice versa. And on the other side, if you haven't, do check out the events that we do, because again, we're going to do more and more, and we really want your feedback on how to improve. And if you are looking potentially to start your own fund venture at some point, again, it could be a great way to connect, because we're all here ready to back great technical startups that build great technologies. And I think that's all for me. So, Pavel, I don't know if you want to make any more announcement. Otherwise, you can sit back, relax, and enjoy great code.
Yeah, absolutely. So just, maybe, short of the day, we have 4 amazing companies from EQT Ventures portfolio. And the engineers from these companies will be talking about what they're building. You can interact with them directly, asking them questions either on the stage or via private messages. If you're interested in the companies in the Expo area or on TechTree side, you can also have a look at the company profiles. All these companies are hiring, but this event is not about hiring. It's about listening to what the companies are building. If you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, reach out to me, Francesco. Also on the audience, you may find Samuel with a beautiful 8-bit tree next to his name. He's part of our team, and if you have any questions, he can help you. And And now, without further ado, I wanted to introduce you to Atul, who's a full stack tech lead at Anyfin, business transforming finance. So welcome, Atul, and me and Francesco are leaving the stage to you. It's yours.
Hi everyone, my name is Atul and I work at Anyfin. At Anyfin, we are building the next generation of platform for improving the financial health of our customers. This talk is focusing on GitOps, specifically on deploying our apps to Kubernetes using GitHub Actions. So let's get started. So let's just get right away. GitHub Actions is essentially allows you to create automated workflows for building, testing, and deploying your code right from GitHub. So think of it as like a event-based thing, wherein before that, a workflow is essentially a series of steps to perform a task, and GitHub Actions allows you to create or run workflows whenever an event occurs. An event would basically be like a pull request event or a push event or something like that, and it would look something like this. So workflows are created in a folder called GitHub, and inside the workflows, and you can create a task. So if you can see, it's basically like an event and then a job which runs specific task steps to perform a task. Now let's see what Kubernetes is. Just a quick recap. I won't be going through the entire Kubernetes thing. So Kubernetes is actually a container orchestration platform. Kubernetes is a system to manage, scale, and deploy our applications, which are packaged as containers. So think of, so for example, if you, let's say you have few virtual machines. In Kubernetes, the virtual machines are called as nodes. And let's say you want to deploy some applications. So you would just send Kubernetes a configuration, right? And this configuration is something like what you desire the state of the system should be. So for example, you want to deploy an application which has like 3 replicas, and it has certain amount of CPU and memory, and it has a public URL of my.example.com and a Docker image of, something like this. You send this to Kubernetes, and Kubernetes would deploy this onto those VMs on itself and would try to manage that state for you. So even if one of the containers go down, Kubernetes would schedule a new one and keep it going essentially. So let's see what this desired state configuration that we give to Kubernetes looks like in detail. So let's say you have a node or VM, and let's say you wanted to deploy an application. So first part of the configuration is called a deployment. A deployment essentially tells Kubernetes how to deploy something onto these nodes. So for example, we would tell what is the image URL, what are the number of replicas that you want. So it just deploys them. It doesn't do any other configuration. Then it has things like CPU, environment variables, which we'll cover in a bit, and the port to which to listen to. But after you deploy, you want to send traffic to it. So since there are 3 instances, you need a load balancer, and that is something called as a service. So a service basically gives the application an internal URL, and also it load balances it to these pods. Now, any request coming to this service URL would be load balanced to these pods. Keep in mind, this is an internal URL, so any other service inside of this Kubernetes can only access them, and not the public one. But we want a public URL, right? And for that, the next part is called a ingress, and it looks like this. So it's a public URL. So any traffic coming to this public URL will go to this service marked by this configuration, and that would be distributed to these pods essentially. So in the end, you have the full system running by Kubernetes. Now, in order to deploy these configuration files, you use something called as kubectl or kubectl, and you write a command called kubectl apply, and the file name basically like this. Now let's take a look at the environment variables. So like I mentioned here, these are the environment variables that you have to send, and in Kubernetes there's an important distinction between config maps and secrets. These are 2 types of ways to pass environment variables. Config maps are essentially like a plain text value. It consists, they are stored as plain text value, and they are non-sensitive in nature. So which means that you can basically commit them into the Git repo. And if you can commit them to the Git repo, that means you can automate their deployments. Like on Git push, you can automate these updations to these values. But secrets are sensitive in nature, so you cannot, commit it to the Git repo, and that basically means you cannot automate it. So this has to be deployed manually. So make sure that you split your environment variables into two parts, config maps and secrets, and keep all the non-sensitive things like URLs to other services, etc., onto the config maps. This is very important, and we'll come to see why so. So in order to deploy secrets, again, you use kubectl and you apply them manually through your CLI. Then in order to link these two, like I mentioned before, there's this deployment configuration, deployment YAML that we mentioned before. It has a key called n_from, and you can mention all your config maps and secrets right there. And that's how Kubernetes would just merge these two and provide them as a single, as an environment variable to the containers running inside the pod. Okay. Now, if you saw, we had quite a bit of configuration values like files, deployment YAML, config maps, services, ingresses, and all that. To deploy them, it's a bit, in order to not mess with the order and for convenience sake, we can merge all of these files into a single YAML file and then send it to Kubernetes instead of deploying them separately. For this purpose, we'll use a CLI tool called Customize. And Customize is an awesome tool which provides like a ability to merge and even manipulate these YAML files with dynamic values. And this is quite a neat tool to have. We'll come to know in a second. In order to merge them, we essentially create a customization YAML file, which is, think of it as an index.js in Node.js world, where you can basically mention all the files that you need to merge. And also there's some extra stuff like common labels. What this does is it tags all of these deployments, config maps, services, ingress, and everything else with this particular tag, like app equals to app-a. So this means if you want to clean it up later, you can just clean up based on this label itself. So this is quite cool. You don't have to add that same label on each of these configurations individually. Now, how to use this with kubectl? Essentially, you do customize build and then the folder name, which is base. So it creates a unified single YAML file. Then you can do kubectl apply to that YAML file that we used to do before. Keep in mind that this doesn't have secrets. That has to be deployed separately. Now, if you see this, this can be further simplified into something like this. Essentially, you build it, but you then pipe the output not to a file, but to the kubectl, and then you read it from the stdin like so. This allows a single short command to deploy all of your configuration. Now let's see how to use this knowledge to deploy everything using GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions looks like this. So the configuration is essentially a YAML file. If you see, we are listening on a push to master branch. So that means we want to deploy every push to master to either production or a test environment, for example. So we wait on the event. We set up everything from, if you're using Google Cloud for Kubernetes, and you have to set up Google Cloud SDK. You have to set up Docker for building your images, kubectl, and Customize, of course. The first step is actually to build your Docker image and tag them. So when you build it, you tag them with the container registry URL. This is the URL that you need so that the Kubernetes can pull the image from here. So if you see, we are tagging each of them with the GitHub SHA. That means every single time you push out a commit, there'll be a unique image pushed to the container registry. And Docker push basically pushes it to the container registry. Container registry is like an NPM for Docker images, essentially, or any container images. And once you've pushed it, you have the URL of the image. You use Customize essentially to modify the configuration and set the app image. Like you basically set the app image to this URL. And then finally, this basically edits the whole configuration in place. And then you can do the Customize build and apply through it. So this is a basic rundown on how you deploy your applications on push to master branch. But before you push to master branch, it's often good to test your PRs, right? And for that, we have something called pull request test apps. Basically, on every pull request, you create a test app that you can test so that you have some confidence before you merge them and deploy to master. So just as before, we had the same configuration inside the base folder. We had all the things like this, but for pull request apps, we add, there are a few different changes, right? For pull request apps, that we don't need 3 replicas, for example, and we also want a separate public endpoint that we can hit. We don't want it to replace the same public endpoint as a master branch, right? So we create a folder called PR, and we add 2 different files, deployment and ingress. If you see, they both looks the same. Now I just add few patches here. Essentially, these are like patch values. And for example, this deployment YAML doesn't have the entire deployment configuration. It only has what needs to change from what was there in base, essentially. So I just want to change replicas to 1. And I just want to change the public URL to app PR1 instead of app.example.com. Then to make this work, we add a customization YAML, like the index file again. And we mentioned that this inherits from base. So it has everything from the base, but it patches these 2 files onto the base. Then we add 2 more stuff, which are quite helpful. One is common labels. PR1 essentially adds tags all of these deployments, config maps, services, ingresses with a label called PR1. This would be useful when we are cleaning up the PR, right? And this one just adds a name suffix so that it's easy to detect when you're doing debugging and stuff. Then this command would change from base to PR. You would build the PR branch, PR folder instead, and then you will apply that essentially. So this is how you would deploy a pull request app. You would essentially listen to pull request event and then do customized build PR, apply MNSF essentially. Now let's see why this is so powerful. And to do that, let's take a case. Let's say you are building a microservice-based product. Like there are 4 microservices, A, B, C, and D. And let's say you have deployed all of them, right? And let's say you created a pull request on service A called APR1, which looks like this, like before. Let's say the config map of this looks like this, which basically means APR1 is now is dependent on B, C, and D microservices, and maybe requesting some things like that. Now let's say you are making some changes and you decided that, I have to make changes on the service B also. So you create a PR on service B, but you want to now test your PR A1 against B PR2 instead of B service. So to do that, it's as simple as just committing a change like this onto the A's PR. Basically, the power of Git allows you to change a small code like this, and the GitHub Actions would pick it up and deploy it again. So essentially, the APR1 would point to this just because of Git, essentially. I hope this was clear. Now, once you have deployed everything, it's now also time to clean up, because you don't want to leave these applications running on a Kubernetes cluster. And that's quite easy. You listen to the pull request closed event, and you essentially take the pull request number, and you do kubectl delete, config maps, deployments, ingress, all of those. But you use the last line called -l, which essentially is like, if you remember, we did tag, we tagged our PRs with something called as common label PR1. This is useful right here now. This is what does this magic. You can delete all of this with just the label that you attach to each of those pods and config maps, etc. That basically sums it up. If you're interested in working on more such cutting-edge tech and product, we have open positions for engineers and data science and product. Please do visit career.anyfin.com and apply. Also, please do follow me on my socials, Twitter and GitHub for such talks and blog posts. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Have an awesome day. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tchernev, and this talk is moving fast and slow with AWS Amplify. What are we going to cover today? Let me just I'm nervous. Let me check that that's working. Am I coming through correct? Yes, I definitely am. I can see that. Great. Okay, cool. So what are we going to cover today? Well, you notice that I have AWS Amplify in the title of my talk. And that's the kind of the main thing that I want us to cover today. AWS Amplify is a tool that my team at Let's Do This has had a little bit of a chance to work with a fair amount over the last 9 months. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about it and then see if it's useful to you guys, right? Because ultimately, like, I can talk as much as I like, but I want you to take away from this, is this a good tool for you? The thing is, that question is always impossible to answer in the generic, right? It's never possible to say, a tool is good or bad. It's just, does it fit or doesn't it? And so I thought what would be helpful is if we go through the use case, what we built with it, where it really helped us, where we felt some pain, and you can hopefully use that context to see if it would be useful for you. So let's get cracking. But before we do, I should introduce myself. Hello. My name is Tchernev. I am a senior developer at a company called Let's Do This, where I've worked for the last 18 months. There are many more things in my life, but I have a LinkedIn profile for that. So let's just dive straight into the good stuff. Namely, what is AWS Amplify? Luckily, this is a pretty easy question to answer. AWS Amplify is a tool that's intended to help front-end developers build apps. And when I say tool isn't quite right. AWS Amplify is kind of a layer that sits over a bunch of other AWS services. And it kind of tries to tie them all together into one cohesive platform you can use when you're building apps. So for example, some of the things it sits on top of, one is AWS AppSync, which is AWS's out-of-the-box kind of GraphQL service. GraphQL, for those of the audience who don't know, is essentially something that's built on top of REST to make it easier for front ends to talk to APIs and get exactly the data they need. Cognito is AWS's auth solution. Amplify wraps that as well. It wraps Lambdas, which are AWS's kind of way of doing serverless. It wraps S3, which is their solution for block storage. And Amplify does a whole bunch of other stuff as well to help manage deployments, scaling, and all a whole bunch of good stuff around there. To be honest, team, if you take one thing away from this talk, you could do a lot worse than Amplify is AWS's take on Firebase. There's a lot of differences between the tools, but ultimately they're trying to do some of the same things. So, I mean, that's what it is. The next question is, what did we build, right? Because as much fun as it is to talk like tech tools and things, like ultimately we as engineers, we build products for people. Maybe it's a side project and the only user of your product is going to be you, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's what your company's doing and you're serving billions, right? But the question of what we built is always important. And in our specific case, we built an app we call Squads. Some context about the company. Let's Do This as a company is focused on fitness, right? Our main product is a tool that helps runners buy tickets to events, like a marketplace, right? If you want to do a marathon, you buy a ticket. Hunky dory, you can turn up, you can run your 26 miles. But when COVID happened 9 months ago, we were like, okay, our user base is runners, but our marathons have shut down. Is there a way we can help people who are newer to this sphere? And we kind of had this idea that exercise is more fun, more rewarding, and more achievable when you do it with friends. And so we wanted to build an app that combines some of the social features of something like WhatsApp. I'm talking chat, photos, videos, like GIFs, emojis, all that fun stuff, with the ability to do kind of virtual challenges with your friends. Now, what do I mean when I say a virtual challenge? Well, a virtual challenge can be a bunch of stuff, but ultimately the idea is you and a group of people are being active together. Maybe you're being active competitively, so you're doing a race, who can be the first one to complete 30,000 steps? Or maybe you're being cooperative, right? We as a team need to do 800,000 steps over the next month because we want to cross Africa, and we'll see lots of fun stuff about Africa if you do it, right? But ultimately, you have these virtual challenges. And I've included a few screenshots from the app to kind of help bring the picture together, right? The first screenshot is just a landing page of the app. It's intended to convey this idea that, these virtual experiences are going to take you places you can't go when the world is shut down. The second screenshot shows kind of like what the app is like once you're actually inside, right? You can see a list of your squads and you can get some idea of, how are these squads doing in the challenges that are taking. And once you're actually in a challenge, you get a chat feed. You can see how the challenge is going. You get lots of information about it. So in this challenge, you can see rather than doing something epic like climbing a mountain, we've set up a Thanksgiving challenge where you're crossing a Thanksgiving dinner table, right? And the milestones you pass along the way are these foodstuffs. So for instance, green bean casserole canyon. But that's kind of the idea of the app, right? The thing is, 9 months ago, this app idea was nothing more than a hunch, right? And we really needed to validate that hunch because as a person building a tool, a product other people are going to use, you don't really have any confirmation that your product is useful and valid until you actually have users. And we wanted to get that feedback fast. And that's where Amplify came in, right? Because, and where it had its biggest win, where Amplify let us build an app in a week. And I really can't stress how much and how useful that was, right? Building an app is a time-intensive process, right? As we all know, right? A lot goes into building applications. But and having one up in a week was so important for us because we could start iterating and start delivering value, which was huge for like the app as a whole, because it meant we can start building a product for our users. But it was also important for us as a company as well, because our general user base as a company was established runners. But this one was targeting a new audience for us. This product targeted an audience we didn't have as much experience with. And so it was really important for us to learn more about how does this audience think? What do they need? And having an app up and running quickly was so useful for letting us do that. Now, having said that, the world is not a perfect place, right? And you always experience pain points when you're doing this stuff. And in particular, I wanted to talk to you about one in some detail, so you can get some idea of what some of the downsides are of Amplify, as well as its clear upside with that app in a week. And the thing I want to talk to you about is business logic, right? When I was talking to you earlier about the different kinds of virtual challenges, I mentioned two, right? There are more than two in the app. Those two are the kind of big ones, cooperative and competitive. And the thing is, as you start kind of thinking about them, these virtual challenges start to resemble games effectively, right? Like they have different rules and they interact with each other in different ways. And you need an engine to kind of manage those, right? To handle all the game logic. And so a natural question when you think about where do you put your business logic, the core logic that makes the app run, where do you put it? The backend or the front end? I was like, okay, well, a natural starting point is the backend. And we ran into our first problem here, which is that AWS AppSync, which is Amplify's GraphQL solution, doesn't really present an obvious way for you to put logic in the backend, right? Talking through this diagram, right? AWS AppSync is a really great tool, right? All you have to do as a developer is write a schema, right, of how your data works. You know, what are your tables? What are the fields within them? How do they connect to each other? And AppSync takes that data and spins up a whole ton of stuff for you, right? It spins up database tables and DynamoDB to store your data. It spins up AppSync resolvers to allow you to interact with that data. And it spins up a whole bunch of queries and mutations and, crucially, subscriptions, which are GraphQL's way of just letting you like retrieve your data, change your data, and subscribe to your data. The thing is, though, if you take this diagram and simplify it down into its core pieces, which I've done here, client and AppSync bits, Dynamo, the only one you as a developer really have control over is that one on the far left, right? You only really have access to the client. Everything else is being managed for you. So there isn't an obvious place for you to put your backend logic, right? Okay, so you think maybe there isn't a place for my backend logic. Shall I put it in the front end? And that's a bit of a pain point for Amplify, right? Because Amplify expects what's called a fat front end, right? It expects most of the core logic for your app to exist in the front end. And if you're building a website, something like that is really conceptually workable, right? Because when you build a website, everyone is always on the latest version of your website, right? Like if you find a bug and fix it, like getting that bug for users is one refresh away. But for a mobile app, excuse me, things are a little different, right? Because for a mobile app, it's not your responsibility as a developer to provide the update. It's the user's responsibility to update their app. So no matter what you do as a developer, you're going to be managing several different app versions in the wild every time. And for something like our app, where we have game mechanics in, it's critical that everyone in a squad is experiencing the same game mechanics, right? Regardless of what version they are, because otherwise, like, you know, if you're trying to play a game and everyone is playing by different rules, the whole thing falls apart. And that works for these challenges as well. So it was critical for us that our game mechanics were unified, and therefore it was critical that they weren't on the front end. And so we're stuck, right? There isn't an obvious place for it in the back end. We can't seem to put it in the front end. Should we just drop Amplify as a tool? And again, that's not obviously the answer, right? Like I spoke about, that app in a week thing was huge for us, right? Getting that functionality quick was so useful. And Amplify had some really great features. We didn't want to have to stop to build for a month before we could actually check whether our product idea was valid, right? In particular, PubSub, right? I showed you some chat functionality in that app screenshot earlier. Having publications, a pub sub model, publication subscription, is critical if you want chat, right? Otherwise, chat doesn't function. And it's a little complicated to build, right? Similarly for auth, in our app, the concept of you being a user was important. So you need to be able to identify yourself as a user and have privileges specific to you. And again, Amplify provided that out of the box. So we seemed a little stuck. We did some digging in the documentation though, and we're like, oh, interesting. Okay, AppSync lets you use lambdas. Right? So if you're setting up a resolver, like a function you want to call at the backend, you can actually point it at a lambda function rather than at an AppSync thing. It was like, oh, okay, maybe that's something we can do. Maybe we can have an architecture more like this, right? Maybe with if we have an AppSync resolver that hits this lambda, that lambda can then figure out what the business logic we need to do is, and then talk to AppSync again to make it happen. Now, this link from the lambda to AppSync is important because AppSync is still doing a bunch of stuff like triggering those subscriptions I mentioned earlier. So you can't just talk directly to the database. But something like this could work, we hoped, right? This seems feasible. And we really hoped it would be. And it was with sadness in our hearts that we discovered actually it's a pain in the ass, right? It was working with that as a setup was super difficult, right? For two main reasons. The first is that the lambdas AppSync presents you with are super bare bones, right? So you don't have any real compile time checks, right? As you're working, you don't really have anything validating your types are as they should be. You don't have anything checking that, you're not making just simple errors in the way your code is working out. And that's critical for something like this because all this lambda is really doing, right, is interacting with an integration endpoint, right? So you need that to be set. The second thing was that while AppSync helps with deploys, because we're integrating with, Amplify, helps with deploys, to actually test the lambda, we ended up needing to deploy to test it, right? There wasn't a way we could figure out to not get around this. We experimented with mocking and it was just a pain in the ass. We tried, we lost a few weeks to it and ultimately we got nowhere. So we found ourselves needing to deploy to test. And the problem with that is that leads to a really slow feedback cycle, right? You make a change and it takes 5-10 minutes for you to check whether it's the right change. And then, if it isn't, you have to do that whole rigmarole again. It's a painful experience. Could we solve any of these problems? And we were like, okay, maybe we can, right? Maybe we can fix the type validation problem. And if we can fix that, maybe we'll need to deploy way less often. And so we'll be able to mitigate that as well. And there are ways to fix that type validation problem, right? You can do it with TypeScript. Set up the lambda with TypeScript, and suddenly everything gets better, right? And we did that and found that our coding did become a lot less error prone. But while TypeScript solved those problems, it introduced issues of its own. Two in particular. The first is that it's seriously bloated the size of the lambda. Amplify's help with deployment does a lot of interesting stuff, but ultimately, it's not the smartest tool in the world. And so it wasn't able to separate out TypeScript from that deployment process. And so the thing you had to deploy just got a lot larger. And so while coding became less error prone and we fixed one problem, the other problem became worse because deployments took way longer. In particular, for one colleague of mine, deployments who had a bad internet connection at home, deployments could take over an hour. Another thing as well is that the TypeScript typings you actually need to do. Because Amplify is a tool intended to help the front-end developers, those typings canonically lived in the client. And so we found ourselves needing to do weird stuff at compile time to pull them into the Lambda from the client, which again was just janky and not what you wanted from a development experience. This was painful to work in, right? As an environment to be in as a developer, this one was a struggle. We found ourselves getting to a point where we were trying to avoid writing backend logic because it just hurt. And that obviously isn't sustainable. So we decided being like, okay, how do we actually fix this problem? And the solution ended up being to start scaling back the very tools that had helped us move so quickly in the beginning, right? We decided to put a custom API in front of all of the AppSync Lambda stuff that could talk to the database directly and start putting our business logic in there. And that let us work so much more smoothly. Having that environment that we had control was so easy that what we realized made huge sense was to just gradually reduce the scope of all the things you can see in the red box until eventually, and we're not quite there yet, but we're almost there, you could get to an architecture diagram that looks a lot more like what you and I would expect to see when talking about an app, right? A client with an API that talks to a database. That was the journey we went on over the course of several months with our backend logic. And I think the main kind of takeaway from it is a takeaway that's true for a lot of these products that promise you the world, right? And it's that they're inflexible, right? apps like Amplify, I say apps, tools like Amplify have specific feature sets, right? And they expect to be used in certain ways. And if you want to break out of that feature set, suddenly you're in for a world of pain. And Amplify in particular kind of expects an all or nothing approach. Having said that, right, and that kind of brings me to the end of my talk, the summary points, right? Where Amplify, right, is a great tool for small, limited scope projects, right? If you know when at the outset of a project, you're not really going to run into any of its pain points. So Amplify is a fantastic tool, right? It does such great work for you. Similarly, if you're a solo front-end developer and you know you don't have the time to like build out a backend because you're just working on a side project, say, Amplify is great, right? It's better to have something than nothing. It's great for prototyping for the same reason that it's useful for small limited scope projects, right? It gets you up in there quickly. And it's also great for micro frontends. I was talking to a colleague of mine about this talk, and he talked about a time he'd use Amplify just as a micro frontend over the top of an S3 bucket. And for that use case, it was perfect, right? You just needed to interact with the data in the backend, and that worked seamlessly, right? I cannot underline enough how useful that app in a week thing is when you're playing in the bounds of what the tool expects. Having said that, this tool has its downsides, right? It's bad if you need flexibility, right? If you need to iterate and think about your logic, and in particular, if you need back-end business logic, Amplify presents a lot of problems, and so you should be wary before you pick it up. Anyway, that's my talk. I hope you've learned something about AWS Amplify. Does anyone have any questions for me? And so yeah, lovely. And I will stop sharing.
Hey, Ivan, that was great talk. And also, may I say, it was probably the fastest talk ever at Tech3. We might start recording the world record here. But Francesco actually had a question to you. So
sure.
How do you compare using Amplify versus Heroku?
Like sure. So I don't have a lot of experience using Heroku myself, so I'm going to struggle to answer this question for you a bit. I think I simply haven't used the tool, so I can't give you a good developer's rundown of the kind of pros and cons of it. Heroku's kind of goal is is Heroku mostly focused around helping you deploy quickly? Am I right in saying that? Platform for the world's platform as a service, build, run, and operate applications entirely in the cloud. So one of the main takeaways as a startup, not having used the tool, so not being able to answer the question as well as you'd like. Amplify, because it's built on AWS, if you have a lot of experience with AWS, you're going to find a lot of the concepts with Amplify really clear right from the outset. So I would lean towards that if you know what you're doing in that environment already. But I apologize, I can't answer the question properly because I just haven't used Heroku enough to give you that great rundown.
Well, you guys can take it off the stage. Martin Love has another question. What are the differences of AWS Amplify versus Netlify?
Oh, you know what, people? You're putting me on the spot here with a whole bunch of tools that I haven't had the opportunity to use.
Guys, Go on, Ivan.
The thing I was going to say is part of the reason we looked at Amplify as a tool right at the beginning is because we use AWS in-house anyway when considering what to do in our words. AWS is what we use on our backends, and so it made a lot of sense for us to just look in that direction. And we didn't consider, in particular, I think having that auth and that those PubSub experiences out of the box, we found really useful. If Netlify and Heroku provide you analogs of those that just work out of the box, I would then you're going to get a lot of the knowledge of functionality. But the best advice I can give to people watching is think about the features you want for your app and then just make sure that those are ticked off. Because if you're in the recommended feature set for a thing, you're going to have a lot less work to do.
Person to speak is going to be Albert, senior front-end engineer at Peakon, an amazing sort of HR-focused software.
Hello.
So, Albert, great to meet you. I can hear you.
Hi.
Everyone else can do as well. So, the floor is yours.
So, hi, I'm going to talk about web accessibility at Peakon. Let's get started. Just a little bit about me. My name is Albert. I am a front-end engineer at Peakon, where I have been working for almost 4 years now. And I have been involved in many different areas of the front-end, building features and building a component library, tuning. But I have always also been an accessibility advocate here. I am a remote employee from Barcelona. And you can find me on GitHub and LinkedIn at AlbertFTP. So reach out if you want to hear about it. Yeah, let's start. So a little bit about what is Peakon before I give the talk. So Peakon is an employee engagement platform where we are continuous listening. We help employees drive the change they want to see on their companies. And when we do that, we are providing a platform that looks like this. You could describe it in two big areas: the employee survey, where the employees will use this survey, a survey that is depicted here, similar like this, where they will be asked a few questions about engagement, and they will be able to answer them via 0 to 10. They also can provide text and comments. And one important thing is that all of this remains anonymous. And then on the other side, we have the manager dashboard. That's where the managers actually receive this content and the scores are being aggregated and displayed in a high level so that anonymity is kept. And then they can compare the scores against other teams, benchmark, etc. And indeed, they can also even interact with the comments that the employees have left. They can acknowledge, start conversations, etc. And we have a huge data set so far now, with almost 150 million responses and 27 million comments. So it's quite a huge data set. And we built we are in a JavaScript shop at Peakon. Everything is JavaScript, except some data science projects, because Python is the go-to language in that world. But everything else, we use JavaScript. In the front-end side of things, we also use a monorepo approach. And we have recently started introducing GraphQL and Apollo, and that's something that is very exciting. But if we move on now to accessibility, I would like to talk, just briefly introduce what accessibility is. And if you pick the metaphor of a library as the source of human knowledge, and you look at this building, you can see that there are some barriers right now that are depicted by these stairs, right? But the thing about accessibility is that not everything that you immediately see is the only barriers. If you actually are able to go through those stairs because there is an elevator or ramp somewhere, you actually get to the books. You might actually struggle reading because maybe you are a blind person, and if there is no audio alternative or a braille alternative, then you still have not been able to get to the content. And web accessibility is the same thing, just brought to the digital world. And one thing I want to mention is that when software and it's built using web accessibility and with having this in mind, it benefits every user and not only the users that actually need those. For example, when I am on a crowded place and I have forgotten my headphones, I can watch a video using subtitles because it's a feature that was initially could have been built to support people who are deaf, but now I can also get benefited of that. So in summary, web accessibility is that ramp to the web here being the library of the digital world. And it is something that is used for everyone, can access everything in an equal way. And it's important both for individuals themselves who can now read the book, but the businesses, because now they can reach more customers, and the society as a whole that can make sure that all citizens have equal opportunity. And to do so, there are some standards, and the current one is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, which is what we have been working at Peakon this year. And let me explain you what has been our journey. So, as I mentioned earlier, accessibility is very important for us for many reasons, the ones that I have just explained, but also because we want to hear every voice. And furthermore, because anonymity is such an important thing. And for a survey to be anonymous, you need to be able to respond to it independently. So for this reason, we have always put a lot of effort on making the survey to be as accessible as possible, but maybe the manager dashboard has been neglected a little bit. So for that reason, this year in 2020, we wanted to change that and bring the manager dashboard to the same level of compliance that we had on the survey. And how do we do that? So we started by bringing a third party to do an audit on our site, which we use then as a starting point and to understand what were our main problems. Then we also use it to plan how we were going to take them. And that was very helpful. There are some automated tools that can also do part of this job. But the reality is that they will normally only catch between 25 and 50% of all the issues. And I'm actually going to explain how that has been a challenge, because you cannot rely on automation only in order to ensure that your site is accessible. Another challenge that we had is how we can make sure that building accessible components and websites is the easy thing to do for the developers in our team. And finally, how we can make sure that we provide enough context to the users of assistive technologies when using the manager dashboard via those tools. So the first example I'm going to use is color. So color is an overlooked problem, but it's something that is very easy to automate. It's very simple to have a tool that goes every page on your product, checks every DOM node, and compares the color of the text with the color in the background, and then it checks that there is enough accessibility. And fortunately, even though that actually we had a few issues with the contrast, we also went through a rebrand this year, which helped us actually pick the right colors when we were doing the rebrand and tackle two problems at once. And you can see the improvement of the contrast. Might be a bit difficult to see here on these slides, but it actually helped a lot the readability of the. But now you can see here that there is another problem with color, and this one cannot be catched by automation. So this feature is a segment heat map, which means that is a feature that where the managers can log in and compare the scores of different segments, and segments being teams, could be offices, or could be other departments. And then they can compare the scores against other drivers of engagement, which means that using the color, we convey some information, because you can quickly see that the ones that are darker green mean that are doing better, and the ones that are red, then that means that they are doing worse. But obviously, if you run a tool, then there is no contrast issues. But if you are a colorblind person, then you might not actually be able to get that information. So that's why we built a deuteranopia mode, where you can change the color theme, and actually it's something that helps you get the same kind of information. Another thing that I had mentioned was how we can make easy for developers to write the right thing. And one big problem, I think, is that in order to write an accessible website, you need to write like very, semantic HTML and in correct heading order, for instance. But one of the advantages of the web, which is its resilience, like you can write broken HTML, invalid HTML, and the browser will render it fine. Or in this case, you can put headings like heading level 1 and then level 3 and then level 4 without any particular order, and it will work. It will work, but assistive technologies will complain or might not be able to actually grasp all the information. So since as developers, we are building components that we might not necessarily know where they're going to be placed at the end on the DOM, because we have a lot of dynamic components, models, and so on, it can be difficult. So what we did is take advantage of the React context and write some heading and section components that, depending on where in the tree they will be positioned, they will render a different heading level, which meant that the page works automatically, and it helps us developers make sure that it will be fine no matter where you put your component. And finally, the last big challenge that we had was how do we give enough context when we are using assistive technologies. In here, you can see an example of a user using a screen reader who is filtering the segments, the comments page, and it's applying some filter, and then the amount of comments that there are after doing this action is a bit lower, right? So we need to provide the user some information which is additional to the information that they had before. And you will see at the end, here that we show 155 matching comments. And how do we do that? So that we do that via other components, utility components that we wrote, like in this case, the visually hidden component that you can use to, when you build a component, make sure that assistive technologies have enough information when using your features. And finally, and this is just to add into the same thing, since we are a very data-driven company, we have a lot of graphs, a lot of infographics, and it's definitely a very challenging thing to actually represent those kind of information in a way that can be used in screen readers or other assistive technologies. And in fact, I think it's not something that we have solved completely, and we are still working in some areas. But in here, I'm just showing an example of how this distribution graph is being read when using a screen reader. So finally, the outcomes of this year work is that I think the first one is that we have learned so much as a team. We have increased our knowledge of HTML and assistive technologies so much. We have also improved our tooling to catch the easy mistakes. And we also have like much better components that assist us on writing those very accessible systems. But I think finally, one thing is to keep that we keep listening to the customers. Since we have so many customers responding to the survey, it means that there are actually quite a big representation of people using screen readers and so on. And sometimes we get an email in support of a user that is struggling to use a feature. And I think that while he might be struggling at that moment, I think it helps us reconsider that feature, improve it, and make it better for everyone. So I think that is something that we should be very proud of. Finally, I just want to finish saying that if you are interested in working in this kind of challenges and making employee engagement accessible to everyone, then you can find us on peakon.com careers, and we are growing and hiring a lot of positions this year. So thank you very much.
And last speaker today is going to be Peter. Welcome, Peter.
Hello, can you hear me?
The floor is. So I'm particularly interested in this presentation, as I think, I was quite early user of Cleo. So Peter, over to you.
Wonderful, cool. Hi everyone, I'm PJ. I am a software engineer at Cleo. A bit about me, I joined Cleo just over 2.5 years ago now, and it was my first job out of a coding bootcamp. Since I've been there, we've grown from a team of 12 to a team of almost 100, so it's been a real hell of a journey. Who is Cleo? What is Cleo? Cleo, very simply, is a chatbot / smart financial AI assistant, delete as you prefer, who really makes fun of your spending, as you can see here. And I say that Cleo makes fun of your spending, and it's a little bit of a joke, but it's also not a joke, because by doing this and by creating a chatbot, a product that talks to users in their language, Cleo is able to make money and user spending accessible and non-intimidating to them in a way that a lot of other financial services sort of don't. And so by creating this really engaging persona, engaging character, engaging tone of voice around this chatbot experience, we make money accessible to users, and then on top of that, we've layered on a bunch of other services and features that help users do all sorts of things with their money. So we've got tools to help you save. We have tools to help you budget. We have tools to help you manage your spending. You can ask Cleo about anything you like about your money. We can give users advances on their salary. We can help users understand their credit scores. And we just generally make money easier for our users to understand. That all sounds great. That's all well and good. But how do we go about doing that at Cleo? In order to make sure that we're sort of building the right things and focus on delivering value for our users, we have a set of engineering principles that we sort of follow to do this. The first among these, which this talk is going to focus on today, is doing the simple thing. And what that means is, for us, that is not over-engineering things. That's focusing on what can we do that's going to deliver value to the user, that's going to maybe not be the most beautiful code ever, but it is going to enable us to learn or enable the users to benefit in some way. A lot of the team, sort of all of the team at Cleo, are very conscious of the fact that our users are very financially vulnerable. And so our code being beautiful doesn't make a difference to them. What does make a difference to them is our code being in their hands. Doing the simple thing first might often incur accumulating some technical debt. And at Cleo, we believe that accumulating technical debt is and can be useful when done in the right way. There are certainly tons of places in our code base at Cleo that has a lot of tech debt around it, but they're places of the code base that don't move very often. They don't change much. They're there and they work and they're not beautiful, but they do their job. And so there's really no need for us to go back and modify them when we could be spending our finite time working on something else more impactful for our users. That takes me on to our third principle, which is being considerate coders. And we don't deliberately accumulate tech debt. And if we're working in an area of the code base that is going to be sort of touched by other people in the near future, or is going to be fast moving, we'll try to signpost things. We'll try to make things easy to modify. We'll try to make things easy to understand. However, that's not always the case. And so when that sort of doesn't work out, we're there to help each other. We're there to help each other understand bits of the code. There's no one at Cleo who understands the entire code base. And everyone is always sort of there and available to be there for each other. And our final principle is that we innovate in our product and not our tech stack. And so we have a very, very tried and tested and very unsexy tech stack at Cleo. We have React and React Native for our front end and Rails on our back end. And these principles are what we use to sort of guide our development at Cleo to help us deliver value for our users. So doing the simple thing, this is something that's really been at the core of the engineering culture at Cleo ever since I started 2.5 years ago and was part of the culture before that. And it served us incredibly well to be able to grow to the more than 3 million users who we have now. And to really demonstrate the power of doing the simple thing, what I thought I would do is, instead of just talking to you about it, let's actually write some code. What we're going to do with writing this code is write ourselves a command line chatbot in 5 minutes that is going to look somewhat similar to what Cleo originally looked like, and a radically simplified version of what some of like the core bits or logic that drive the chatbot part of Cleo look like now. So without further ado, let's jump over to an editor and a terminal and get going. So I've got here an empty skeleton project. There's the root directory, there's a main.rb file, which is empty, and there's an app directory, which is empty. So just to start with, what we're going to do is have a little welcome message that's going to say, hello world, because this is a talk to developers and everyone loves a little hello world reference in a developer talk. What we're going to do then is just write ourselves a little loop and say message from the user is the user's input. And this is going to be, at this very first point, a really dumb chatbot. The chatbot is just going to parrot back at the user what the user said to them. And it's going to do that after a half second delay to make it look like the chatbot is smart and has thought about what it's saying back. So if we then do that and run main.rb, we can see we've got a chatbot that says hello world, and I can say hello chatbot, and it will say it back to me. Super simple. It's not very exciting conversation. So let's see if we can do something a little bit smarter. So if we kill that loop, and the first thing that we want to do with our chatbot is to try to understand what it is that the user said. And so to do that, what we're going to have is a little class that's going to take care of classifying or labeling the message from the user. So if we make ourselves a new file, and let's call it message classifier. And we've got our message classifier here. Let's pop that next door so we can see what's going on. And we've got a message classifier. And that's going to take a message that we're going to classify. This is also the first time I've ever done any live coding, so I really hope that, I don't screw this up in any way, because this is really stressful. And this message classifier class is going to have one public-facing method. It's going to have a single interface, which is going to be the classify method. And the classify method is just going to return us a very simple structure. It's going to return us a hash with the text, which is just going to be the message. And it's going to return us a label. And that label is going to be the label that we decide on. Let's make this a private method. And we'll say if message.downcase.include hello, then the label that we'll apply is going to be labels hello. That doesn't exist yet. If it doesn't, we're going to say labels unknown. So let's make our labels class just to keep it nice and separate. And we'll have our labels in here. Let's put them here so we can see them again, and put them in the module unknown equals unknown, and hello equals hello, and then we'll just need to require this file in here, and in here we'll need to, let's not go there yet. But so here we've got a very basic class that is just taking a message and it's applying a label to it. And you can imagine this if-else statement sort of growing over time. And then once we've got a classified message, what we need to do is to understand how we're going to reply to this message. So let's make ourselves another class called message responder. And let's get our message responder out here. And that's going to take the classified message that we created before. And that is going to then have a single public method, again, called respond. In a real-world application, I might make these service objects to give them a bit of a nicer interface. But for the moment, that's sort of fine here. So we make sure we can access our classified message. And when we're responding, all we're going to do is just put the message. What is the message? Well, the message is just going to be a basic map. And we're going to map our labels to a string of text. And that's going to be, we're going to access the label in there. And we're just going to say that the label is classified messages with label property. So once we plug these in, this should all work, fingers crossed. So let's give that a go. So let's require, this is going to need to require the labels as well. I've just noticed that this file is spelled incorrectly. We're missing classifier. That's fine. So let's require these. Let's require these two files, and we can use them in here. Message equals gets.chomp, and then we're going to say message classifier dot new with message dot classify, and we're going to assign that to a variable called classified message. And then again, after our little sleep, we are going to say message responder dot new classified message dot respond, and hopefully that should give us a functioning chatbot. So let's run that again, and we've got a hello world message, and we can say hello robot, and something's wrong. Hooray! What has gone wrong? I ran through this yesterday, and it worked. Given 1, expected 0. Have I misspelled initialize? I've misspelled initialize is what I've done. And I've done that there as well. Initialize. Here we go. And now I can type hello robot. And the robot will say hey there, and I can say something else. And the robot says excuse me. And that is our functioning chatbot that we've made in just over 5 minutes, which is pretty cool. So to get back to it, how do we take this further at Cleo? I've obviously just shown you there like an incredibly rudimentary example. So what do we do further? We have entity detection, so that if a user asks, for example, how much have I spent at Sainsbury's in the last week, we know that the user's talking about the last week, and we've got a time period there, and we know that the user's talking about Sainsbury's, and so we want to look through their Sainsbury's transactions from the last week and surface that information back up to them. Again, that's something that started really, really straightforward with basic if-else statements, and is now extracted out to a machine learning service that exists in SageMaker. We also have machine learning classification for messages. So instead of just having a basic if message contains hello, call it hello, we have a machine learning classifier to label these messages. We've got custom-built software for copywriters, so that we can iterate on the copy of our messages, which, as I mentioned earlier, sort of provide the real core to that user experience without needing any developer input at all there. We built in support for understanding context, so that if you're in the middle of a conversation with Cleo and you type a message, Cleo should be aware of the context in which you've typed that message and be able to respond appropriately. And we've also built in rich messages and really pushed the boundary of what a message can be. So some of them come with sort of graphs of your spending. Other messages, you receive them, and then it will apply an entire theme to the whole app. And so these are just some of the ways that we've iterated on this like very simple base, each one always going like a single step at the time, that's evolved into something quite sophisticated now. And so to take it back to our principles, doing the simple thing, technical today is useful. We're considerate coders, we help each other, we innovate on our product and not our tech stack. If any or all of these principles resonate at all with you, then we're hiring and we'd love to speak to you. So come chat to me afterwards. I'll be hanging out in the on-stage area. And if you'd like to chat about anything in my talk, again, I'd love to speak to you about that. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, Peter. That was super impressive. I was very stressed about it, but I actually think that might have been like the most impressive presentation we've had. Well, definitely first slide at Tech Tree. And I definitely going to show it to our CTO and our tech team and your approach to technical debt. But that was pretty cool. And I think you're building a great product that I feel like was able to establish, was able to use tech to establish kind of like a personality of an assistant that's actually talking about money engagement in a way. That I feel is a pretty unique approach. We have one late question from Francesco. If you had to rebuild Cleo, would you stick to your tech stack?
I would say absolutely, yeah. Rails, most of my time is spent working on the back end, and Rails has been phenomenal for just getting out of the way for us and letting us do our own custom stuff. The bit that makes Cleo really sort of sparkle and shine, and just getting out of the way and letting us sort of really iterate quickly on that. So yeah, absolutely 100%. I love our super simple, super plain, super boring, super unsexy tech stack. It's wonderful.
Thanks. That's all for us today. So thanks a lot, Peter. You're free to go.
Thanks very much, Pavel,
for sacrificing your lunch today. And I hope to see you in the new year for some new amazing events. So we're going to be doing events with North Zone, Albion, and a couple of other VCs and their portfolio companies in the next year. So thanks a lot, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you again.